Phyllis was a very, very good friend of mine, and unfortunately she passed away and she had cancer. We're so grateful that he was caught and she had a chance to see him plead, and then her sister was able to read her impact statement.
On June 17th, 1976, I went to bed not knowing that in just a few hours, my life as I knew it would change.
We all stood up so she could see us in the hospital, and she was watching us from our hospital bed. Phyllis did not have to leave this world holding on to that. She was able to let it go, and she was able to get justice. We gave her an early Christmas. We had a Christmas party. One of the survivors called in and sang Silent Night to her. She's a musician. Our therapist wrote her a poem, and she called and read it to her. And we did the Christmas, and make me cry a little bit. We were there until the day she died. So that's kind of like how deep these friendships went.
We talked for hours on the phone before we met.
Yep.
There was just an instant ability to have a conversation that could go on.
Right.
And we just talked about everything.
You know, the rape connection gave us a bond that many people can't feel. But beyond that, Gay and I, about a month ago, I guess, we went up to her cabin. And I remember us talking and saying, you know, you're my friend, not someone that I know that got raped. You know, we're friends. We're not rape friends. And I care so much about her and so many of the other people that we really, you know, we know each other's families. Cheers to friendship. We don't talk about him at all. We talk about our dogs. My dog, Cello, is the brother of her dog, Callie. They met Cello first and said, oh, we would like a lab because their other lab had passed away. And so, you know, it's just, I don't know, we really enjoy each other's company.
I'm not sure if this is true of other victims, but when I've looked back on my life, I found it very difficult to make friends after the attack.
There is the fear that when they find out, whether you tell them or they find out from someone else, that they will be so disturbed by it that they will distance themselves.
Absolutely.
And they will go away. Mm-hmm. And that is, that's painful and hurtful.
I'm going to do whatever I can to take the blame and the shame away from victims and survivors.
Kris decided to establish the Facebook group, Sexual Assault Survivors, It's Time to Tell Your Story. With the survivor group, there's an instant recognition of, oh, this is someone who has shared an experience and knows what it's like and has to deal with adaptations in their life as well. And it has somehow, I don't know, made it easier to forge new friendships now.
For anyone that can finally tell their story, and that is in many different, that doesn't mean you stand up and say everything that happened to you. For some people, that's really important to get that out. For other people, they write music, or they have a journal, or they write a poem, or they, paint a shed. It just depends on how they want to express themselves and how that they can feel whole. And I believe our group does that.
I had attended high school through the 70s in the Valley in Lodi, which is a farming community, a wine growing community, and met my husband after I graduated from college that year. And I was a real estate broker and a marketing director for a real estate development firm. We both had very busy careers. We had put off plans to marry for a while. We were just happily going about our lives, and bought the home with the intention that we were going to move towards setting a date, and eventually we would have a family. When I was diagnosed with PTSD, which was 7 years after the attack, the psychiatrist then explained to me that what happens is your central nervous system is basically rewired, and it won't ever go back to the way that it was before. I was experiencing severe, unbearable anxiety during the course of my second pregnancy. And I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't function well because of this terrible stress that I was under. He said, this is what has happened. You have unresolved trauma. You suffer from PTSD that hasn't been addressed. And if you weren't expecting a child, I could probably help you a lot with medication, but because you are, you can't have medication. So he decided, and rightly so, that I really needed to leave the stressful job that I was working in, that was requiring me to travel and be isolated and be exposed to strangers and so many triggers at that time. So I did. I don't know who I would have been if the attack had not occurred. I had dreams of going further in my career. I had thought about going to law school myself, and the attack changed all that. It was just, there were so many obstacles every day that needed to be negotiated and worked around. And so my husband and I agreed, and we made changes. We sold the big house, we built a smaller one, we enlarged our family. And in the end, we had a healthy little girl. And we realized how much better our family life and our marriage was when I was no longer in that stressful position that I had made a career for many years. We were each other's partner and best friend before the attack, and we're each other's partner and best friend today. And we didn't let it destroy us. So what would I change now? I wouldn't go back. I wouldn't give any of my 4 children back. So, but it's hard for a victim to understand that their path has changed. They will just have to make adaptations along the way and try to balance what they're doing with the goal of happiness in mind, especially in a case like ours, which went unresolved.
When Joseph DeAngelo was caught, I had no way to process it, because after my rape, I was told to never ever talk about it. I just had to undo the voice in my head from my dad. As the evening began on December 18th, 1976, I was a normal 15-year-old kid. The next morning, December 19th, I woke up knowing I would never be a child again. I had to go through that trauma again, and I wasn't equipped for it. And so through the county of Sacramento, they have a victims compensation fund, and they will pay for our therapy. And so that was probably my first support that I had. And I found a trauma therapist and was able to work through those issues and desensitize the triggers. I began to meet other survivors, and even to this day, the survivors in our group, no one talked about it. And I do think it was a cultural thing. I believe to this day, you still don't talk about it. And it is such a tragedy for people that are suffering all by themselves to have nobody. And I feel that part of the reason may be that no one wants to think where they live is unsafe. You know, you hear, oh, I live in this neighborhood, this stuff doesn't happen here. But it does, just no one talks about it, so no one knows.
We do become the caretakers of the people who find out and weren't prepared to find out, and they suffer in shock for a moment.
My parents didn't tell their own brothers and sisters. No one knew. I told them, you know, later after he was captured, and they were like, wow, we had no idea. You know, for me, it was for 40 years, I didn't have any support, and then turn the page to the next day, and the love was just coming in, and the support was unimaginable. We had a gathering here. I had invited the survivors here after one of the hearings. I remember the first time we met. Hi, I'm victim 10. It gave me a glimpse of what their experience was without me having to ask, and I felt like I could be a better support system for them. This is the network of survivors, and charged or not charged, and we had become so close and really knew each other.
Late in 2019, I met Kris and the other survivors, and I began attending hearings.
Well, it was the evenings leading up to the plea agreement. You and Jen Carroll and I, we were meeting in your backyard regularly. Like, we just sat out, and it was girls' club.
That happened between several different groups of survivors that became really best friends.
I trust them to tell them anything, you know, and that probably came through that terrible experience that we went through and creating the bonds of trust and never having that trust betrayed.
I think that many sexual assault victims feel that they are different after their attack, that there is something that has happened to them that hasn't happened to anyone else in the room. If they're in a group or at a party or with a group of friends, they're the only ones that this has happened to. And they feel different because of that.
I think that this disaster, you know, brought us together where we would have never met. But
Right.
that disaster's over now, and now we're on our own with our own friendship.
New adventures.
We continue to meet, occasionally with survivors, and realized how important it is to know other survivors and how healing it is to be with another person who totally understands what you've gone through. Kris and I discussed at lunch one day this idea that she had of having a place where survivors could meet and they could be with other survivors, and they could tell their stories if they want to. And she asked me if I'd be a moderator and help her with, responding to some of the victims. And it just, started out with 40, 50 people, and now I think it's up around 600. And they're from all over the world and all over the United States.
So it is a private group, but what that means is anyone can join. You just need to answer some questions, make sure that you're in it for the right reason. We definitely do not have looky-loos in there, or someone that's trying to get an experience that isn't right. And so I kind of screen them, but everybody is welcome. I feel that the community who wants to be supportive should have the opportunity to, as well as learning more about how to better support a survivor. So I would say it's probably about 60% survivors and 40% supporters. And that's a really, really good mix, because it is absolutely taken away the shame to hear someone that's never been assaulted to say it's not your fault, or how can I help? We are still in a rape culture.
Yes, we are.
And we're at the bad end of it. And until people wake up and we shut them down and help them, guide them out of their ignorance, it will continue.
Kris has sort of forged a path forward, and others of us are kind of helping clear the debris.
You and a couple of other people I know I can count on to care, to make sure and take that time to support. And when people have come to the house, you guys are here so that they have a kind of a welcoming committee.
Some people are like us, whose attack occurred decades ago and they've remained silent. Others are dealing with a recent attack, or recently have left an abusive situation of some kind.
Most people, they will join the group and they won't speak a word for maybe 3 or 4 months. And then they might say, I really want to tell my story, but I'm not ready. And of course, everyone says, it's your story, you own it. So whenever you're ready.
I do feel very passionate about getting the information out there to other victims so that they have hope that they can make their life into the life they want it to be. It might not be the same life they had originally envisioned for themselves, but that they will find a path, and they won't always be in the depths of where they are if it has just happened.
If our group could grow and spread that love to many different locations and give women the courage and the faith that it's okay to speak out and speak up, maybe rape can start to be seen as it really is. My eyes have been opened to 42 years of needless isolation. I'm still healing. I'm finding new ways to be stronger and to heal, and I believe that the more I'm able to do that, the more I can share with others.